Well, first of all, I'd never been the chief before.
Right.
And when you're the chief, certain things come with that. It's been said so many times, it's kind of trite, but the police are the most visible representatives of government.
We have the honor of sitting down with Sergio Diaz, a titan in the field of policing whose journey traverses the bustling streets of Los Angeles to the serene avenues of Riverside, California. Sergio Diaz's tenure as chief of police for Riverside from July 2010 to September 2019 was marked by unwavering dedication and a commitment to community safety. But his story begins long before his Riverside days. With 33 years of service in the Los Angeles Police Department, retiring at the prestigious rank of Deputy Chief in 2010, Diaz's experience and insights are unparalleled. Today, we have the privilege of exploring Diaz's perspective on the crucial role of internal affairs. Without further ado, let's dive into the depths of policing with Chief Diaz, a true embodiment of integrity and resilience. Welcome to Internal Affairs, a police podcast. Let's go. Okay, we are Code 6 at scene with, you know what, I'm not going to say it's just an honor, Sergio. Muchas gracias. You know, thanks for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time to come.
Of course, it's my pleasure, my honor.
Thank you, thank you. Before we get started, let's give a quick shout out to the sponsors. First and foremost, as you may know, I'm a law enforcement instructor with Savage Training Group. Look, no death by PowerPoint. It's not check the boxes. We really engage, and the goal is to ensure that the education you get in class, you're going to give that all to the truth so when you go back to your police agencies. Then we have the Titan Group. Look, if you want to outsource any type of internal affairs investigations or just complex workplace or any of that sort of type investigations, get a hold of the Titan Group, a professional investigation firm. Then we have Code 4 products. You have coins and challenge coins, badges and insignias. Get a hold of Code 4 products. And last but not least, who doesn't love coffee? Man, I've been drinking coffee. When I was in the Navy, I used to drink 32-ounce coffees just to stay up when I was working graveyards. I'm sure the chief here can tell you, es cubano, I'm sure you like cafe. Everybody likes cafe con leche, you know. But anyways, Code 7 Coffee, you got to get it. Again, look, all the websites are on the YouTube channel. And let's get started without further ado. I really appreciate not just showing up, but I know that you have such a history with the LAPD, and we're going to get into all that. But more than anything, what I am excited about is that you actually worked internal affairs in probably every different type of rank, from a sergeant to lieutenant, and you ended up as a captain as well.
Yes. And
so, well, let's get started. Why don't we do that? And I'm really interested to know how important you would rate on a scale of 1 to 10 internal affairs in a police department. What do you think?
Well, I think it's, on that scale of 1 to 10, I think it's a 10, and for a very simple reason. We are, I mean, I used to be, but we're going to consider that we still are.
Yes.
We're American police officers. We police because the police allow us to. Mm-hmm. Government governs through the will of people. And I know you've had other guests on that have said similar things, but essentially people come from all over the world to live in our society under our freedom. And it's been said so many times, it's kind of trite, but the police are the most visible representatives of government. Yeah. Many of the people that either were born here or came from someplace else are expecting oppressive, corrupt, evil policing. We want to disappoint those people when they're expecting that. That's not what we want to give them. But anyway, I've thought about this issue long and hard. the way the police conduct themselves vis-a-vis the people we serve is vital to the citizens' relationship with government. Okay, and this isn't anything new. It's not anything that came out of community policing or any of that. I remember early on being told, this is how far back that was. The example was used with Chinese immigrant organized crime. That what I was told by superior people is, look, a lot of the people are in Chinese communities are they're convinced by the criminal element that the police are corrupt and you can't trust them and you can't report crimes to them. And they would use such things as, well, people get arrested and then they get let out on bail. Of course, the criminal element would paint that to be, oh, we paid the police money and we got out, so you better not cooperate with them. That's a perennial concern. That always happens. So anyway, that's a long answer to, it's very important because we can't do our jobs. People will not report crimes. They will not identify criminals. They will not cooperate in the criminal justice process if they don't have faith that the police are essentially good.
Yes, and that's probably one angle of a 10 that I really didn't think about. The fact that we should be definitely held at a higher standard. Me, born and raised in Peru, you come from Cuba. Yes, you can attest to the corruption, the handshake deals, the cutting corners, just to survive, and to feed your family, because that's just the culture of policing. And we come here to the United States, and we're super respected, and we're held to do a job, like you said, something along the lines like, we have the ability to take your freedom away. And so, I think internal affairs is definitely the watch. That's super important.
And it's human nature. I mean, the police are in the business of holding people accountable. Well, when you do that, when you take on that task, people are going to hold you accountable and expect you to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah, that is true. Let me ask you this, Chief. What is the one thing that you think that all IA investigators should know or do? So if you had a room full of sergeants that are just starting an internal affairs assignment, what would you tell them?
Well, I think I'd tell them what I was told when I started, the first time I started internal affairs. When you started on an investigation, you shouldn't have any preconceived ideas, neither for the accused nor for the accuser. Your job is to be a fact finder, and I know that goes back a bunch of years in my case, but that was, I think, pretty much drilled into us. Your job is to get to the truth of the matter. That was the slogan when I was at Internal Affairs, the truth of the matter. Then secondarily, you haven't really succeeded if you haven't acquired enough information to give the adjudicator the ability to come to a definitive conclusion. So you well know there's a number of dispositions for a complaint, not resolved, unfounded, sustained, exonerated. And unfortunately, there are going to be cases where the nature of the evidence is such that at the end of the day, the adjudicator is not going to be able to say definitively, this happened, this did not happen, this happened, but it was justified, those kinds of things. But the goal of the investigator should be, I hate to use the cliche, but to leave no stone unturned to get to the bottom of what did happen, so that the adjudicator can, with confidence, say, okay, here's what happened, and here's my decision.
In your experience as an IO, as an investigating officer, did you witness or did you see that people? I guess the better question would be: is there investigators that have preconceived ideas?
Oh, sure, of course there are. I suspect that in this conversation you and I are going to have, one topic is going to come up repeatedly, and that is that human beings are human beings. We all have feet of clay.
The human element.
Yeah, and so we aspire to, what we aspire to is not always what we achieve. So, yeah, you shouldn't have preconceived ideas. Now, the good news is this: people can learn also, and the longer you're at something, including at life, the less you trust your intrinsic and invisible biases.
Yes. Very well said.
So, yeah, when you're young, you think you've got it all figured out, and you know how things go, and that looks like a guilty one. He looks innocent. As you get older, you realize people will surprise you, and folks are capable of just about anything, to the good and to the bad.
To the bad. No, absolutely. Yeah. Let me ask you this, though. When you became, and I know we're going to go down trip down memory lane, but when you became a investigating officer in internal affairs, did you feel that you were prepared for that job at that time, if you can reflect?
Yeah, at the time, and I think that this is still the case. I've been gone from LAPD for 14 years. I think this is still the case. Internal affairs assignments were kind of exceptional in that you can't just apply to go to internal affairs and get picked based on an interview. There's a loan process.
Right.
So supervising detectives and sergeants are loaned into internal affairs, usually with a team. They try to, have a case that maybe can be handled in a couple of months, if that's the length of the of the loan, and to give the division a chance to look at you and to give you a chance to
see if it's something that you want to do.
If it's something you want to do and all that. And so I had gone through that. Gosh, I kept thinking of it. I can remember the case I had on loan. So I'd gone through that, and then had worked up there on loan for a couple of months. Had it was a pretty good ride along. It's so I had a sense of what the culture was in the division. I didn't think that, okay, these are a bunch of guys that are out to get everybody that, or alternatively, these guys have never met a guilty policeman. I thought they're playing it pretty square. And I had never been a detective, but I think I had fairly good instincts for investigations, and I was a good writer, which is unduly important, at least during my tenure in IA. We argued a lot about whether that sentence should take a semicolon or a comma, which isn't good. But I felt comfortable there.
Good. And questions like this, I really appreciate it, because these are all lessons learned. I mean, you said it best. When you're young, you think you know everything, and as you move through life, this is just not police, but just through life, you get better at something, and which is one of several reasons why I wanted to do this this particular platform of this, because there's just so much to learn. Like you said, I remember when I went to internal affairs, I didn't think that everybody was, like, oh my God, they're out to get you. Like, they think that we're the rat squad or we're this and that. In fact, for me, it was a little different. I went straight to the advocate section. And what I didn't know is the emotions that came with such an assignment. And I'm a very, enthusiastic, happy guy. I like to laugh and always smiling. And I tell you, man, it really challenged me because it's dark. And you're facing serious misconduct, and so I really appreciate all that. Anything else you'd like to add before we take a nice little trip down memory lane?
No, I generally I was very impressed with the people I worked with at Internal Affairs, and I have issues sometimes with the ways we did things, but that's management imposed protocols and such. But I liken being an internal affairs investigator to being a cop in general. You know, there are going to be people that don't like you because you're a police officer.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's nothing you can do about that. I believe in doing things when there's something I can do about it.
Right.
But your opinion of me is out of my control, so I'm not going to worry about that much. And I knew when I was 22 years old and I became a policeman, I knew that there were people that didn't like the cops. And well, okay, they've got their reasons. You know, they might be right not to like the cops. It depends on what they've been up to. And with internal affairs, it's the same thing. Yeah.
No, totally. Which is a good segue because this is kind of like my favorite part. A trip down memory lane. Look, let's see. I'm going to run it down and then we can kind of highlight some stuff here because what I'm really interested is, you know, at the fact that you, when you made lieutenant. So let's see, the academy in February of 1977. Then you ended up at Southwest. In your probationary period is what we call boots and P1s. And lo and behold, you leave and you go to communications, which I'll touch a little bit about on that as well. And then Hollenbeck. And then you became a P3. I know you did several other jobs, but as a P3, you were in Hollenbeck. You did that in 1981 as a field training officer. And at some point, you made it as a public information officer. So we have that in common. Sergeant in 1985, lieutenant in 1991, and like to highlight in many of the sergeant assignments that you did, one of them was internal affairs. That's when you got introduced to IA. When you made lieutenant, you went to IA. And I'm going to stop there because at that point, you made lieutenant in 1991, and you were there in 1992. And so the question I have for, you know, I used to always ask my FTOs this question is that on the day of the verdict for the riots, where were you and what was going on? Can you remember that day?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that day. Some people may not know or may have forgotten that on the particular day that the verdicts were out, and it was the day that the verdicts were expected to be out, so it wasn't a surprise. Most of the LAPD's command staff was in Oxnard at a management retreat. I know the chief of police was severely criticized for that decision, but my regular job was I was a watch commander at Southeast area, but that day I happened to be the patrol captain, you know, the acting patrol captain, because the patrol and area captains both were at this retreat. Although the patrol captain came back, I think he was there. It was after dark. It was maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and we were friendly. And just to show you how naive one can be, I tell him, John, we got to get out there and see what this is like before it's all over. You know, I mean, how many times in your career are you going to be in a riot? You know, and I was pretty sure that by sunup it would all have been done. It didn't work out that way, but yeah, we went out and got into a little bit of a jam. You don't need to say more than that, I think, but yeah, I remember where I was.
So you basically did you even go home for the next 3 days? Because it was just, I know the first 2 days, the city was burnt down.
Yeah,
I mean, it was pretty much like a war zone, if you will.
It was a war zone, and I remember driving back and forth. You know, this is at the time there was no such thing as patrol rifle, but I carried my own rifle in the car going to work. You know, so yeah, but we got through it, and I'm proud to say, you know, I think I mentioned to you before, in Southeast Division there were no areas where the police retreated and people were dragged out of cars or any of that stuff. We engaged. We did the best that we could, but I'm proud of our people that engaged, and they did their best to protect the citizens of Los Angeles.
Oh, good. Captain in 1998, a couple of divisions. We'll talk about that. And you made commander in 2006, deputy chief in 2007. And you said goodbye in 2010. You weren't done. In 2010, you were appointed as the chief of police of Riverside Police Department until 2019, and so it's been a good 5 years that you've been gone out of law enforcement. And God, it's such a decorated career. I got a question for you. Maybe we can get a little humor out of this. What was communications like when you got there?
Oh God, the whole time I was
like,
on,
what did you do there?
answer the radio, the telephone. I was operator 50 on the Spanish line. So at the time, I think.
Did they pay you for Spanish pay or no?
I beg your pardon?
Did they pay you for speaking Spanish?
Throughout my career, sometimes I've been paid and sometimes I haven't been, and depending on. I don't think I was paid during in communications, but I worked PM watch at the old Parker Center at the old, just like you see on Adam 12.
Yeah.
People would call and you'd fill out a card and it would get sent on a track down to where the RTOs, the dispatchers were. So people were given a 7-digit phone number. I think this is even before 911. People were given 7-digit phone numbers to call the police, and there was one 7-digit phone number where there was usually a Spanish-speaking person taking the call. But yeah, throughout at that time, I don't know when they stopped. I think they have stopped sending
police
officers to communications. But at the time, and for many years, there was a shortage of dispatchers, and so I was a phone call taker.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel sometimes as though that the dispatchers are unappreciated, and and they're not.
Not by me. Let me tell you, I've had 42 years between two police departments, and I have no hesitancy in telling anybody that will ask, in any police department, the smartest and most dedicated employees are not the cops necessarily, they're the dispatchers. Their minds are wired differently. They can do things that other human beings can't do. And they are extremely, by and large, they're extremely protective of officers. And they have, one of the difficulties that they have that I think people don't think about is, especially in a big department, they talk to the public, they're aware of the calls, they get a little bit of information, and then they hand it off. And they don't necessarily get closure on those calls. And let's be honest, most calls you don't need closure. You don't care about what happened.
You're
to
like,
the drunk.
I'm done with this call.
Yeah. But there are calls that involve children and tragic circumstances and all kinds of things where I think, just from a mental health point of view, we could do a better job of circling back to dispatchers, the ones that care, and say, hey, on this call, such and such happened. But it's an extremely difficult job, very hard to even qualify to get the job. And like I say, they're not underappreciated by me. I have all the appreciation in the world for dispatchers.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't say this to say that they're special. Of course, everything is special, but to a different degree, because they do a lot that unfortunately we don't recognize as much. So I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so take me rather than me asking you about internal affairs. You were there as a sergeant, lieutenant, and a captain. So big difference between. I guess the question I'd like to know is the transitioning from being an investigator to an adjudicator. What was that like? Did you feel like in other words, when you became lieutenant, you did the job as a sergeant. Did that help you a lot?
Oh, of course. I think LAPD has during the time that I served, it has a particular way of developing people that I think is really effective. You're in the academy, and then you go into the field and you work with a partner who mentors you and so forth, and then you work by yourself.
Yes.
And then the next step is you mentor someone else. And it's this iterative process that I think works really well. Typically in LAPD, the letters of transmittal, the document where the commanding officer says, I've looked at this investigation, here's what it says, here's what I conclude from it, and here's what I think should happen now. That's written in the captain's voice, but typically by a lieutenant.
Correct.
And even that process it's very intelligent. It's a good way to develop people. And it's kind of funny, at the beginning, you make lieutenant and say, okay, here's your first cover letter, and if you're lucky, the boss will sit down with you and say, okay, let's talk about this. What's important? But almost invariably, he's not going to give you too much help, he or she. The boss is going to give you the insight and that you need, hopefully. But it's a test.
Yes.
Are you capable of understanding this investigation, of kicking it back if necessary, asking for more if that's appropriate, and synthesizing what it says and coming to a conclusion that you can defend? That is, there is a preponderance of evidence as to what happened. And then, and again, it's a good test of leadership, because, all right, Lieutenant, you write the cover letter. Not only did you come to a correct conclusion about what happened, but what does this mean? What does this all mean? Was it a mistake in judgment, caused by a lack of experience or whatever, or is this a cardinal sin that we're going to have to impose a death penalty on? We're going to have to separate ourselves from this employee. Where does it stand in that range, in that gamut? What is this? Do you understand? Why do we care? Why do we even discipline? Yeah. And I look back on, as I was being developed as a sergeant and so forth. I had mentors. I had people who explained, okay, here's why we discipline. Here's the 3 reasons. And somebody else could come to a different conclusion, I think. But when I was coming up, I said, look, we do it to correct that particular behavior with that particular employee. We don't want that person to do this again. We want to have the hygienic effect of not having other employees do the same kind of thing. And then finally, we want to reassure the public that we work for that we take these things seriously.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question.
I know you did. You answered it well, because the interesting part about this trip down memory lane is, as we get into the next segment and talk about an IA story, we just can't pinpoint one particular story, because you have so many with internal affairs. But is there, in terms of an IA story, let me ask you this: is there that one case that kind of sticks out? I mean, you've been around 40 plus years where, you know what, when I was a captain out of Border Rights, we had this case, or when I was a lieutenant and I had this letter transmittal, this findings, we had to make a decision, and I had to tell the boss, hey man, that this is sustained or it's unfounded, or maybe as an IO where you investigated. Is there one that really just hits home to this very day that you can think of?
Well, there is, and it hits home because it hit me personally. I had a reaction that I recognized wasn't my finest moment.
Okay.
But it was a moment that passed. And this happened to me as the chairman on the Board of Rights. As you well know, yes, certainly when I was doing boards of rights, typically the board was 2 command officers and a civilian, and the senior of the 2 command officers, by either rank or tenure, would be the chairman of the board. And for some reason, relatively early, I found myself to be the chairman on a lot of cases. And what's entailed with that is the chairman is kind of responsible. You know, the board doesn't have to vote unanimously. There can be a split vote and even a dissenting opinion and all that. But the chairman is in charge of keeping things together.
You're the quarterback.
Yeah. And in this case, it was a weak case. It was a very weak case. And I know I've talked to you about it offline, but I don't want to extend this too long.
Right.
But we were surprised when the department presented its evidence. My reaction was, this is crazy. This accused officer, you know, what she's accused of is what I would do in her circumstance. It was an off-duty case having to do with family dynamics and essentially an incorrigible minor who was the kind of the officer's stepchild. And the officer didn't engage in brutality or any of that, but it seemed to me that the department went out of its way to make a case on something that wasn't misconduct. It was off duty and didn't really have implications to her duty, to her duties.
Right.
And I couldn't figure out, why do they have this in for her? What she did, in my view, first of all, isn't misconduct. I guess you could argue that it was if you really stretched it, and it was very minor misconduct. But they've sent her to a board of rights. They have signaled that they want her fired for this. Right. And the part where I'm not particularly proud is, by the way, this is under the tenure of Chief Parks, who was known as a very strict disciplinarian, and very interested in the disciplinary system, and I respect him. I really do. I think Chief Parks did the things that he did, and he viewed the world as he did for good reasons. But I also knew by that point how cases get presented to the chief, and the chief didn't read every line of every page of every case.
Of course,
cases were briefed to him because I had done that briefing when I was a captain at IA. But I thought, for a brief, I don't know how long. It was less than a minute. I thought, God, this is a tough situation because I know what I should do here. I know what I morally should do. And what I morally should do is toss this piece of garbage. But if I do that, Bernie Parks isn't going to be very happy with me.
Yeah, it's going to cost you.
It might cost me. It might. I wasn't even sure that it would, but it might. And immediately I was overtaken by shame. And I thought, what the hell? And again, we've talked about this. I have... my dad was extraordinary in his integrity and in his bravery, his physical and moral courage. And I realized when I thought about, Bernie Parks isn't going to be happy with me, then I thought of my dad. I thought, geez, man, my old man risked a whole lot more than his boss not being happy with him. Yeah, he risked his life. He risked prison. He fought communists in the Bay of Pigs. He escaped Cuba under the cover of darkness. And he was always getting in trouble for expressing his views. And he didn't have much of a to give about that. Yeah. So I was ashamed that I had this moment of doubt. But I repeat the story because I think there's a lesson there.
I do too. I would imagine that moment, unfortunately, is shared amongst a lot of your peers as command staff officers. It's what I call self-serving. It's what I call, we're not here for all the right reasons. Let me ask you this, though, Chief, and just in terms of the quality of the case, because it's my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you're going to be at a board of rights facing termination, it better be serious misconduct. Would
That's
that be
my understanding?
That's your
too,
understanding too.
You know, and I think you've explained to your audience in the past, in the LAPD system, you can get to a board of rights in one of two ways. A directed board is where the chief says, I want you to go to board because I think the punishment should be more than
a month or so,
than a month
22
or so.
days, whatever that was.
Or the employee, the officer could always opt for a board. Even if the chief wanted to give the employee, 5-day suspension, the employee dug in and said, no, I'm innocent. I want it to be heard by a judicial panel.
And I guess my question is, you've been a chair of this border rights process, this hearing process. Did you feel as though that sometimes you got cases that just didn't really belong there? And I want to be fair because there is a lot of cases that do need to go to a border rights.
Yes, of course. And my experience was most cases were serious misconduct with substantial evidence, and it did need to go to a board. But there were a couple. There was, and really, literally only two that I can recall. I thought, what are we doing here? and the other one was one where, again, two officers. Both of these cases involved a total of 3 employees. They were all women. And I wonder whether there wasn't some intrinsic bias there. But in the other case, 2 women officers were accused of not making an arrest that they should have made. The charge was correct. There was neglect of duty. They should have made an arrest. And it was an arrest for theft from vehicle. They were guilty. There was good evidence that they didn't do what they should have done. But it wasn't a board case. It was a 5-day case. And I think we gave them 5 days suspension or something. And it made me wonder, what the hell are we doing here? And I never quite got to the bottom of it, but I thought, could have, the original person that complained about it was an influential person in the division. And so maybe it was that. I think this goes to another cultural issue in the LAPD. These 2 officers were not, my sense was that they were not, as we say, balls of fire. They were not extremely energetic and all that. But you don't get to fire them for not being balls of fire. You gotta, fair is fair.
Preconceived ideas.
Yeah. And, I'd been around long enough to say, boy, if this is somebody we liked, obviously we don't like them. In the division, we don't like them. Because if it was somebody we'd like, we'd give them a slap on the hand and say, you know what, Roger, don't do that anymore.
Yeah, and which leads me to a point, and talk about this, this self-reflection of shame. Did it ever wonder to you that it went through all these levels of review?
Yeah, well, look, that's another issue there, and I think you have a lot of experience in these things. You may have an opinion about this. One thing I realized, especially as a captain at IA, is when you have a multi-phase process, everybody can be doing their job adequately, and still you end up with a mess. You sometimes need, and I would do this when I was captain. I was one of the 2 chief investigators, and my office was at the Bradbury building, and I would see all the complaints that came in every day from the complaint desk. And sometimes I would take action on them right then and there, because I look at this, I can see where if this goes to the next step without my input in it somehow, it's going to get twisted. Not because anybody wants it to,
right?
But everybody's going to do their job and still going to come out to be unfair. I'll give you an example. Again, I refer back to the Parks era. We had, and I know you've talked to some of your past guests about this. We implemented a policy where if a member of the public complained, no matter what the complaint was on its face, no matter if it was ridiculous, the famous, the officer stole my kidneys. Or
my
whatever.
kidneys are ovaries.
They're ovaries. If the person said, I'm complaining, if they said the magic words, then you had Well, that in and of itself was bad enough. It's hard to manage that. But it's certainly clear-cut. person says they're complaining. One of the unintended consequences of that policy, and I saw it up close, I saw it on a daily basis, is the workforce, not just the officers, but the civilian employees, they saw that any member of the public had this power to say any crazy thing and initiate a complaint against them. They didn't think that was fair. They didn't like it, and then they started using it on each other. Yeah, and the policy was specific. Hey, this mandatory reporting thing, that's for community complaints. That's for external
the public,
not inside stuff. But still, people can be very clever at depicting something, using language to make anything into a complaint, and anything can be a civil rights complaint and everything. And so I remember once I'm in my office at the Bradbury building at 7 o'clock at night or something. I'm going through these complaints. There was a married couple on the job. They're husband and wife. They're going through some stuff, and come to think of it, I don't know the male half of it was a police officer. Could have been at an outside agency, but I don't remember. But certainly the female was a member of the LAPD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this guy complained that during an argument, they were estranged, separated, and all that. During an argument, she threw a pillow at his head, thereby battering him. And I remember thinking, if I don't do something right now, this will take a life of its own. What? Come on, man.
Go could laugh about your right. It's going to end up at CCV at 210 West Temple with a battery charge.
Yeah, you're claiming that your ex-old lady threw it was either a pillow or a sofa cushion or, come on, man. So I did some things to make clear that I thought, hey, this is not a real thing. This begins and ends right here. But I took chances.
Yes.
Every once in a while.
Yes.
Yeah. And you made that reference to, some people who won't take chances and who won't stand up. I mean, so to be a police manager, first you have to be a police officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go through the ranks and all that. And so it always seemed to me unfitting that, so you've got all these accoutrements of masculinity, nightsticks and pistols and shotguns in the car, and pepper spray and tasers and bulletproof vests, because what we do is a big adventure and it's very dangerous and all this stuff. Yeah. But when it comes right down to it, in an organizational setting, you're like a huge you're a coward. And that was a minority, very, very small number.
Yes.
But come on, man. Yeah. You're a police executive. Yeah.
Totally. I share that sentiment with you, to do the right thing, and it just becomes so personal at times, and it does bother. It doesn't just bother me. I mean, it's one of several reasons why I decided, to have this podcast. But I think more than anything, it's the audience that gets to learn from these conversations.
And I have to tell you, I grew up. You're talking about having been a PIO. So I was a PIO. I was in the chief's office as a young police officer, and I was privileged to work around some of these guys, some of these older guys. The Lanzaronis and Ionones and Hardens and these guys that, they came up in the 60s, maybe some of them in the late 50s even. And I was privileged to be around them when they would talk about some of their colleagues. And it was clear to me, oh, no, these guys don't all think the same. Yeah. And they have certain standards, and they don't like cowardly people. Yeah. I remember one remark. And for my whole time in the Riverside PD, I had to kind of keep this to myself. But I remember a couple of these old timers back in the mid '80s. I overheard a conversation between them, and one says to the other, he says, most chiefs of police in this country wouldn't make a pimple on a good LAPD sergeant's ass. This is the way these guys talk. And I remember thinking, wow. But my takeaway on that was on a good LAPD sergeant's ass.
Yep.
That's a pretty high standard. Making a pimple on a good LAPD sergeant's ass. What it told me is that's a special thing. These guys are talking about, this is a special thing. To be a good LAPD supervisor, it really is a special thing.
No, absolutely, 100%. And I really appreciate you sharing all that. Let's get to worst and best. I'm sure you have a worst incident that happened in your career. I know you and I, before we started recording and filming the episode, I do know you were the chief in Riverside when the Dorner incident happened. And it's if you'd like to share that or whatever it is that you shared, that again, going back to the Rolodex, what's something that really, to this very day, kind of bothers you as your worst time in your career?
Yeah. Well, no, Dorner certainly was that, and there's a lot of lessons learned. But I don't know if I would suspect that all of your viewers are hip enough on what we do to know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But back in 2013, well, and I should back up just a little bit.
Yes.
I became the chief in Riverside PD July 1 of 2010. Mm-hmm. And in a 33-year career in LAPD, I had friends that were killed in the line of duty, but never anybody that directly worked for me. And the two that I can think of, they're friends, they're both killed in traffic accidents. But in November of 2010, so I'd been in RPD for 4 months, I lost my first officer, Ryan Bonaminio. Ryan was 27 years old, single man, a veteran of the United States Army, a veteran of Iraq, and just been RPD officer for just right around 5 years. And he was killed during a foot chase of a career criminal who ambushed him and Ryan at point blank range with his own gun. That was very difficult, and I became very close to his parents. Mm-hmm. And it was a learning experience for me because I had never, well, first of all, I'd never been the chief before.
Right.
And when you're the chief, certain things come with that. But it was almost, and by the way, we caught that criminal. He's on death row, as much as that means anything in California. But it was kind of a warm-up for a case that would be more difficult in several aspects. And that is in February of 2013, so just a couple of years later, we had an incident where Mike Crane, another military veteran, I think Mike had been a Marine, Mike was killed, and he was killed by this individual whose name I'm not going to mention anymore, just because I have the superstition that every time his name is mentioned, a drop of water drops on him in
totally
hell,
understandable.
and I don't want any more drops of water dropping on him. But this individual had been an LA police officer, had been fired while on probation because he lied about an incident. Navy veteran, but when you look closely at his whole career in the police department and the military, he was a screw up. Mm-hmm. He himself in the hand in the academy. He got in fights with partners in the academy. He had a relatively privileged life, but deep racial resentments from childhood. And he was one of these guys that he was never wrong. He was always right, and he was outstanding, and the world had done wrong by him. Just the typical victimhood that we see so much of these days. Anyway, he lost his job as an LA police officer, and he eventually went on a rampage. And I'll tell you, well, the first person kind of narrative was, first I hear this, and I'm in my office at Riverside PD about 7 in the evening, and one of our detectives, who was assigned as an intel officer, so he was on the task forces and the joint terrorism stuff and all that. He calls me, and he tells me the story. He says, "Hey, boss, I don't know if you've heard, but there's this guy, kind of rogue LA policeman fired, and he's put out some communications. This all happened today, and it looks like he's expressed some hatred for some LAPD command officers, and just to let you know, because maybe you had something to do with that case." And I said, "Well, what's the name?" and all that. I said, "I've never heard of the guy. I'm not concerned." But this is when the so-called manifesto was getting out. And I said, well, I'll be damned if at 1 in the morning I don't get awakened. And I think it was, well, I don't even know. But I'm awakened and said, "Hey, we just had one of our guys, well, 2 of our guys, one was dead, and it's that crazy LA, it seems like it's that crazy LAPD guy."
Yeah.
Well, what had happened is the alarm went up during the day. People were identified who were on his list. He had expressed some hatred for, and the LAPD sent out units to different parts of our whole region to protect people. And one of these units, a Newton unit, gets sent out to Corona to protect. I still don't know who it was exactly in Corona, but some captain or somebody. Now they're out of range. They're out of radio range of LAPD. They're in Corona. They stop at a gas station. I think to fill up, but also to get some
need.
Something to eat for the rest of the night. And they're approached by a citizen. This is after midnight, I think. They're approached by a citizen who says, "Hey, I've been watching the news. That crazy guy," in fact, the guy that they were sent for, he was just in here in this gas station. There he goes. LAPD cops go after him. They spot him. The vehicle he's in matches the description they had generally, although he had changed out the plates. And he gets on and off the freeway at the bottom of the, he stops his car at the bottom of the ramp, gets out, and
engages
the LAPD officers disabling the car. Gets back in his car, goes down Magnolia Avenue, and he comes across a 2-man unit from RPD, Mike Crane, who was training his probationer, Andy Takias. Andy had done his probation before in Englewood PD, but he transferred over to RPD. Anyway, I'm going to get into some detail here because I think it's important.
Yeah.
He's at a stop sign. The crook is a stop sign next to a cab driver. Across the street is the black and white unit with the 2 officers. The crook has come to a stop. He's still got a red light. He goes through the red light to place himself adjacent to the police car. There's a civilian car between the police car and the criminals once the criminal stops. He opens up and fills up the
Engages.
the cockpit of that police car with I think a full magazine from a
An assault
AR-15
rifle.
type rifle. Interestingly, we don't get any calls of shots fired, no noise complaints, nothing. Which was also the case in Irvine a few days before when he killed Randy Kwan's daughter and her
Your boyfriend.
betrothed. So he was using a silencer on that rifle. Both officers are severely wounded. Mike Crane, the driver officer, probably died instantly. Andy Takias is hit. Mike gets hit. I take that back. Andy is driving. Andy's foot lifts off the brake, and the car starts
To roll.
till it hits something on the other side of the street. That cab driver that I told you about, a guy named Karam Kaoud. Karam was a relatively recent immigrant to the United States from Palestine. I talked to Karam later on. We went to some things where he was recognized for his bravery. He was afraid to approach the police car. He saw what happened.
Yeah.
This guy just filled up a police car with a bunch of bullets. He was afraid, thinking, the cops might think that he was the bad guy coming back to finish it off or something. But he intervened anyway. He put the car in park, and he followed Andy's directions to get on the radio and get help. There was a unit down the street, a couple blocks away. The officer in that unit had been a Navy corpsman, so he'd been trained in first aid and all that stuff, more than most cops even. In response to the radio call, the officer comes over, he gets Andy out. And
Renders aid
and all that.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that if not for that sequence of events, we would have had 2 dead cops.
Yeah.
By the way, there was a car between the police car and the Crook's car. There was a young fellow named Jack Chilson. Jack and I have also become friends. Jack, after the Crook leaves, essentially the Crook fires over the hood of Jack's pickup truck. And what does this guy do? Once the Crook leaves, Jack makes a U-turn, chases after him.
Oh, wow.
He tells me, God, he blames himself because if he had thought of it, he would have thrown his cell phone in the bed of the truck so that we could find him. Yeah, don't blame yourself.
Something to live by for sure.
The reason I go into all that detail is, we all see things differently. One of the how should I say, one of the kind of the legends, one of the narratives that has arisen in the last few years is this thing about sheep and sheepdogs and wolves and all that. And that narrative goes something like this, there's 2 kinds of species in this jungle of ours that are capable of violence, and that's sheepdogs and sheep, and but the sheepdogs and wolves. But the wolves are malign and the sheepdogs are benign, and we protect the sheep that are incapable of violence. All right, whatever works for you. If that's what you need to tell yourself, but I don't think you need to tell yourself that. We're human beings.
Yeah.
In that narrative, where do these 2 guys fit in that narrative?
Yeah.
Kaoud and Schultz. These guys put themselves at risk to help us, and in one case they probably did save us. So there's a lot more to it. I had to, I went from that scene to Mike's house to give the notification to his widow. Got to deal with the widow and the children and his
arrangements
parents
and everything else.
And so I learned a lot, including the fact that when somebody dies, when your friend dies, we all feel for him, and your friend or
it's a big impact.
Everybody feels but nobody feels like a mother.
Yeah.
There is no consoling mom. There just isn't. And I've dealt with it, a few times now. I also, have little kind of rules and ways of looking at things as a result of my experience with that.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I tell people, well, you're going to be a chief? Well, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you what happens when they kill one of your guys. From what I can see, you've got 3 jobs. When you're the chief, you've got 3 jobs when they kill one of your guys. And 2 of those jobs are delegatable. So the first thing is we got to catch whoever did this. And I have to tell you something, in Riverside PD, that was great. And not because of anything I did, but it was there already.
Yeah.
Great investigative capabilities. And so you got to catch who did it. And in the case of Ryan Bonaminio, the detectives did a great case. They did a wonderful case with the other one too. But you can delegate that, the catching of the crook. The second part is, we got to throw a big party. We got to have a going away. And again, you can delegate that. You set up a team, and and unfortunately, in Riverside PD, we had people who had experience of doing it not that long before. And that includes a lot of things, from the religious service to, when Mike got killed, the crook was still,
at large.
He was expected to be at large.
Yeah.
He actually was killed in a siege up in Big Bear the night before the service. But the DNA had not yet confirmed that it was him and all that. So there was a big security challenge there. But anyway, people could take care of that. But the third part, which is not delegatable, only the chief can do, and that is, you got to take care of the family. And you got to make sure that all the things that we promised one way or the other, because we assume them, we presume them.
Absolutely.
Having to do with your children and all that, you got to make sure that those things are upheld, and you got to be there for the family. And if you're not up for that, you probably don't want to be a chief.
Oh, totally, man. You know what, Chief, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Let's go, give me something good. Give me something best. Give me something awarding, something that you accomplished that, because it's kind of hard to say best incident, but something real good that came out of your career that you're very proud of.
There are a lot of things. First of all, I'm really not just proud, but I feel very grateful for the opportunity. I tell people all the time, the city of LA gave me a lot more than I gave the city of LA. Yeah, I am, no doubt. And among them, those things are the opportunity to work in all the important parts of a police department, and the opportunity to have and I think this applies to, you don't have to be a chief. This applies to all cops. All of us, if we have any decency at all, we need to acknowledge this. You told me you're coming up on 55 or something?
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, that's a great time. It was the best time for me. I would be 55 all over again if I could. But sometime before or after 55, many men, and I suspect women too, but I think it's a particularly male thing, many men have this crisis of meaning. What did I do with my life? As I'm approaching the third part of my life, what did I do, and did it mean anything, and did I make a difference? Well, if you're a police officer, you don't have to, that's one conversation you can avoid. You can spare yourself. You know that your life had meaning because of the people you helped and the things that you improved. If nothing else, that makes the morning watches and missing kids' games,
Yes.
all that. It makes it worthwhile. I mean, if you're of that bent, some people
Yeah.
aren't of that bent. They don't really think about a crisis of meaning.
Yeah.
But that's one. So I'm very grateful for being able to have lived an adventurous and worthwhile life. Towards the end of my my tenure in the LAPD, well, and I'll try to keep it brief, but I'll give you two answers. Towards the end of my tenure in the LAPD, the reason that I was made a deputy chief was we had screwed up a major event pretty well in 2007, on May 5th of 2007 in MacArthur Park. And there was a recognition by Chief Bratton at the time that we needed to fix our relationship with the Hispanic community. And I think over the next 3 years, we did do that. So I feel proud of that.
That's awesome.
In the RPD didn't need much fixing, to tell you the truth. They had gone right at the turn of the century, right around 1999, 2000. There had been a very problematic and controversial officer-involved shooting, the Tyson case, and the department had been under a consent decree with the state attorney general, which, by the way, consent decree with the state attorney general is very different from the consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice. But certain things had been put in place that were actually good things, made my life easier. So, for example, there was a community police review board, which they got all of our, and we haven't even talked about that, but all of our community-generated complaints, they got the investigations after we got the investigations, and on a blind basis, they would vote on how this should be classified.
Right.
Sustained or not sustained, that kind of thing. And I found that to be very useful for me. That helped gain the public trust, because we weren't the last ones to see it. There was the community group to see it. But anyway, some good things would come out of that, and like I told you before, the detective functions were outstanding. The field work was very, very well done. There was one area that they were really lacking in, and that was leadership at the highest levels. And the prior chief had surrounded himself with drinking buddies and golfing buddies and going out and chasing women buddies. And a lot of those decisions that should have been based on merit were not. So I feel proud that we kind of tweaked that. And again, I think we did some positive work on the community relations side. So maybe bringing it all back, maybe I can wrap it up with this.
Of course.
And I know I told you this before we spoke, but it's been a month or so. When I was 21 years old, I decided to apply for the police department. I told my dad. I've mentioned my dad already. I told my dad, hey, I'm going to be a policeman. And my dad had some familiarity with the stuff. He had been kind of the equivalent to a mounted policeman in Cuba, and under a very corrupt regime and all that. So you're going to be a policeman, huh? I said, yeah, I hope so. He says, well, okay. He says, make sure that you comport yourself in a way that when you stop being a policeman, you don't have to leave town. And you know what, Marlon? I stopped being a policeman in 2019. I didn't leave town. And I feel good about that.
Good. That's... Well, you know what? I thank you for all this. Any parting words? Anything you'd like to tell, any young kid that's out there? And a lot of it has to do, and what I like about this conversation is that, you being command staff in LAPD, the reality is there is some young sergeant, there is some young lieutenant that's probably listening or wondering, or maybe a young officer or someone applying that, look, you're going to get into this type of, as you move up the ranks, keep your integrity, and I think that's very important. Anything other advice you give someone?
Well, along those lines, and again, I've seen your program with other guests, and I know you talk about this. There are some habits that are healthy and some that are not so healthy.
Right.
Most of us have children, and so we have some pretty good ideas about the friends that we want for our children.
Mm-hmm.
What we would like for. What we seldom think about is we have the opportunity to be the kinds of friends that we want for our children.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is you want your kids to hang out with others who make them better.
Yes.
Others who don't excuse their misbehavior, but raise them up to better standards. We got to be that friend for everybody around us.
Yeah.
Part of our culture is we're proud of physical courage. Running into burning buildings, running towards gunfire. Saving lives. And that's all fine and good. That's great. But what I found out is physical courage is actually not a rare commodity, especially among young men. Yeah. Moral courage, however, is very rare. And that's what we need to work on. A good friend, a morally courageous friend, is one who just doesn't go along with you when you want to violate the rules. A good friend tells you, no, I don't want to do that, and I don't want you to do it. And a really good friend doesn't let you do it.
Yeah.
No, by the way, not only are we not going to go out and do that stupid you're staying right here with me.
Gosh.
And that's what we need more of. And I think if we had more of that, we could do a little bit less disciplining.
Yeah. You know what? Mi querido hermano, muchas gracias por todo. Thank you so much for everything, Chief. I really appreciate it, and we're going to wrap it up, and thanks for coming. And on that note, please be safe out there, and don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.